From the very beginning, something felt off, and the more you peel this apart, the uglier it gets. Because this story was never about confusion, mixed emotions, or a family struggling to move on. It was about power, about silencing someone before they could speak, about making sure money stayed exactly where certain people wanted it. The deal itself was smooth, fast, efficient. The offer came in clean, documents were prepared immediately, signatures were collected within days, and payments were sent without hesitation so no one could later claim excuses or delays. Everything was lined up. The finish line was right there. And then everything stopped. Not because of paperwork, not because of legal confusion, but because Robyn stepped in at the very last moment, not to finalize the sale, but to block it entirely. Her condition was simple and chilling. Nothing moves forward unless everyone signs an agreement promising silence. A confidentiality clause. A hold harmless clause. A document that would permanently shut Meri down. No speaking publicly. No legal action later. No attempts to reclaim money that was taken from her. Just silence. Forever. And full protection for Robyn and Kody. That's the moment the real story reveals itself. Because while the show tried desperately to push a narrative about some mysterious backdoor deal involving Yanel, that storyline was never the truth. It was a diversion. A calculated distraction meant to turn the women against each other so no one would focus on who was actually pulling the strings. The tell-all should have blown this wide open. Instead, it became a masterclass in avoidance. No documents reviewed. No timelines challenged. No one pressed for real answers. Just a recycled version of a false story repeated until it sounded convincing. But reality doesn't bend that easily. By January, the land division was already settled. Yanel, Kody, and Meri had signed off. The buyer was ready. The sale was set. The only person refusing to sign was Robyn. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The deal hovered on the edge of collapse. That growing pressure was exactly what Robyn needed. So she rewrote the delay as emotional pain. She claimed the land represented a dream that died. A family that was supposed to live together forever. A future she wasn't ready to release. She positioned herself as the last one holding on to hope while everyone else abandoned it. But that explanation doesn't hold up. Her attachment wasn't emotional. It was financial. The land wasn't a memory. It was leverage. Because paying Meri meant acknowledging how money moved behind the scenes. Where it came from. Where it went. And who benefited from it. The Vegas house. The equity. The half that never made it back to Meri. The money redirected elsewhere. A new luxury home. A trust. A paper trail carefully designed to erase Meri from the equation entirely. That's why the NDA was non-negotiable. That's why it appeared only at the final moment. Already written. Already finalized. Already demanding compliance. No discussion. No revisions. Sign, or everything collapses. A deliberate power move. And then comes the most disturbing confirmation of all. An unseen clip reveals Kody openly admitting he believed he owed Meri nothing. That he found a loophole. That he intended to use it. This wasn't ignorance. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was calculated. Yanel saw through the performance instantly. She didn't believe the tears. She didn't accept the victim narrative. She said it outright. Robyn plays the part she believes she's meant to play. The devoted wife. The family-first sufferer. The gentle soul grieving what was lost. But it's a role. One that protects her actions. And whether Kody buys the act or not is irrelevant. They moved together. The story was built together. Rehearsed together. Defended together. That so-called backdoor deal? Just another smokescreen. The real objective was always the same. Push the sale through in a way that reduced Meri's share, force her silence, and ensure she could never expose what actually happened. That plan collapsed for one reason only. Meri refused. She brought in attorneys. She didn't back down. She wouldn't sign another document telling her to shut up. And that's the real reason they're angry. Not delays. Not logistics. But because they lost control. They couldn't silence her. They couldn't block future consequences. They couldn't erase her voice. When Meri says she will not be silenced again, that isn't theatrics. it's self-preservation. Because this wasn't the first NDA, and the existence of an earlier one raises terrifying questions. What was she forced to keep quiet about? For how long? And why? That's why she kept saying, year after year, that there was more to the story. This is the part they never wanted told. And now you see why the narrative had to change. Why Meri became the villain. Why Yanel was cast as suspicious. Why Robyn suddenly appeared fragile. Because the truth threatens everything they've built. This was never about heartbreak. It was about money, manipulation, and a desperate attempt to bury the truth. And this time, it didn't stay buried from the very first second. Something about this entire situation feels wrong. Not confusing. Not complicated. Wrong. Because when you slow it down and really examine what was happening behind closed doors, it becomes painfully clear that this was never about emotions or a family struggling to move on. This was about control, leverage, and making sure one voice was silenced before the truth could surface. The deal itself was clean. Fast. Almost unusually smooth. The offer came in, paperwork was drafted immediately, signatures were gathered within days, and payments were sent without delay so no one could later accuse anyone of stalling. Everything was lined up. The finish line was right there. And then, everything stopped. Not because of legal confusion. Not because of missing paperwork. But because one person stepped in at the very last moment and pulled the brakes hard. Robyn didn't show up to finalize anything. She showed up to shut it down. Her demand was simple but devastating. Nothing moves forward unless everyone agrees to silence. A confidentiality agreement. A hold harmless clause. A document that would strip Meri of any remaining power. No public discussion. No legal options in the future. No chance to recover money that was taken from her. Just silence. Permanent silence. And that's the moment the story shifts. Because while viewers were being fed a narrative about a so-called backdoor deal, the real manipulation was happening right in front of everyone. The distraction wasn't accidental. Turning Yanel and Meri against each other served a purpose. If they were busy questioning each other's motives, they wouldn't be looking at who was actually engineering the situation. The tell-all should have exposed all of this. Instead, it became an exercise in avoidance. No documents reviewed. No timelines challenged. No one pushed back. Just a carefully packaged version of events repeated until it sounded believable. But the facts don't support that version. By early in the year, the land division was already agreed upon. Signatures were in place. The buyer was secured. The only thing missing was one signature, and that signature was intentionally withheld. Days turned into weeks. Weeks dragged into months. Pressure built. And that pressure wasn't a mistake. It was the setup. Because the longer the delay, the easier it became to rewrite the story, to frame obstruction as heartbreak. As the weeks dragged on, the pressure started to shift, but not in the way viewers were told. What was framed as emotional hesitation was actually strategic delay. The story being sold was that someone just couldn't let go of a dream, that the land represented unity and a future that slipped away. But that explanation only works if you ignore the paper trail. Because this wasn't about memories. It was about leverage. Paying Meri what she was owed would have forced uncomfortable questions to be answered. Where the money came from. Where it went. And who benefited from it. And those were questions no one wanted asked out loud. The Vegas house sale sits at the center of all of this. Equity that should have been shared. Funds that moved in one direction only. Money that didn't disappear, but reappeared elsewhere. A new home. A much more expensive home. A trust. A clean reset that conveniently erased Meri from the equation. That's why silence became non-negotiable. The confidentiality agreement wasn't an afterthought. It was the entire point. It arrived fully drafted, fully formed, and dropped at the last possible moment. No discussion, no negotiation, no compromise. Sign it, or the sale collapses. A classic pressure tactic. A power play designed to force compliance. And then came the moment that confirmed everything. A clip viewers hadn't seen before. Kody openly stating he believed he owed Meri nothing. That he found a loophole. That he intended to use it. That wasn't confusion or misunderstanding. That was planning. Yanel wasn't buying the performance. She saw the pattern clearly. The tears didn't convince her. The victim narrative didn't land. In her eyes, Robyn was playing a role: the devoted wife, the family-first sufferer, the heartbroken believer. A role that protected her actions and softened public perception. And whether that role was for Kody, the audience, or both doesn't really matter, because the outcome was the same. The story was crafted together, repeated together, and defended together. The so-called backdoor deal? Another layer of misdirection. The real objective never changed: push the sale through in a way that minimized Meri's share, lock her into silence, and make sure the truth never surfaced. But there was one problem they didn't account for. Meri didn't fold. She didn't sign. She brought in lawyers. She refused to give up her voice again. And in that moment, the entire plan started to unravel, because silence was the only thing keeping it all together. And without it, everything else falls apart. Once Meri refused to sign, everything changed. The frustration you see now wasn't about paperwork or delays. It was about lost control. Because without her silence, the entire structure they built around this deal started to crack. That's when the blame quietly shifted. Suddenly, Meri wasn't standing up for herself. She was being labeled as difficult, uncooperative, the one holding everything up. But that framing ignores one crucial fact: she wasn't delaying anything. She was protecting herself. Refusing to sign a document designed to erase her rights isn't obstruction, it's survival. And here's where it gets even darker. This wasn't the first time silence had been demanded. The existence of an earlier confidentiality agreement changes everything. It explains years of vague statements, years of deflection, years of Meri saying there was more happening behind the scenes without ever being able to say what it was. Silence wasn't accidental. It was enforced. So when another NDA appeared, Meri recognized the trap immediately. She knew exactly what it meant. Sign it, and history repeats itself. Refuse, and become the villain. That's why the narrative had to flip. Yanel was suddenly questioned. Her loyalty was suddenly doubted. Conversations that never led to action were reframed as betrayal. Every angle of this story was adjusted to redirect attention away from the real issue: the attempt to legally and publicly muzzle the only person with legitimate claims. And the more you look at it, the clearer it becomes. Robyn didn't need Meri's money. She needed Meri's silence. Because as long as Meri could speak freely, the financial trail stayed alive. The equity, the transfers, the benefits that continue to this day. That's also why fear became part of the storyline. Meri was painted as unstable, as dangerous, as someone people needed protection from. It's an old tactic: discredit the truth teller so no one listens when they finally speak. But that tactic didn't work this time. Because Meri didn't back down. She didn't explode. She didn't beg. She simply stood firm and let her lawyers do what lawyers are supposed to do. And in doing that, she forced something they never expected: exposure. Not in court. Not yet. But in plain sight. And once the silence broke, the story they worked so hard to control could no longer hold itself together. Once the silence was gone, everything they had carefully managed started slipping through their fingers. Because without that one signature, there was nothing stopping the truth from breathing. No contract to hide behind. No agreement to enforce quiet. Just facts, timelines, and consequences waiting to be acknowledged. That's why the anger lingered. Not because the sale was difficult. Not because time was lost. But because their last line of defense failed. They couldn't erase Meri. They couldn't corner her. And they couldn't make this disappear the way they had before. For years, Meri had hinted that there was more beneath the surface. People dismissed it, called it drama, said she was holding on to the past. But now it's clear she wasn't clinging to anything. She was being restrained. And once those restraints loosened, the truth began surfacing in pieces they could no longer control. This is why the story keeps shifting. Why explanations change. Why blame is constantly redirected. Because the original version can't survive scrutiny anymore. Every attempt to simplify it collapses under the weight of what actually happened. This was never a misunderstanding between adults trying to untangle shared property. It was a calculated effort to secure money, limit exposure, and protect a carefully crafted image. And the moment that effort failed, the narrative turned vicious. Meri refusing to stay quiet wasn't rebellion, it was reclaiming herself. Choosing not to be erased again. Choosing to let the truth exist, even if it made others uncomfortable. And that's the part that scares them most. Because once someone stops agreeing to silence, the story doesn't belong to them anymore. It belongs to the truth.